Craig, welcome back to This Is Horror podcast. It has been a couple of years.
Good to be back, even though I'm still not sure why I'm on a horror podcast, but it's good to know. Good to know the love's there.
Well, on this occasion specifically, it's definitely because of the release of Mother Howl,
Mm-hmm.
which, we are going to get into that imminently, but I wonder, before then, what have been the biggest changes for you in these past 2 years, both personally and professionally?
Wow. I've been, well, not a lot. I mean, the pandemic hit, and that I know a lot of other writers felt the same way, but especially for those of us without families, like that was pretty much business as usual for me, only a little more extreme. But otherwise, I'm perfectly happy with, writing, my cats, Netflix. I've been keeping a very low profile. I've been dividing my time between the Central Coast and the desert. I've got a patch out there that I'm looking to build on in the near future, but that keeps getting delayed. So I've kind of pulled back from civilization in a lot of ways. Writing was honestly, I talked with Rob and Rob about this. Just bit of a hiatus for that for a while unintentionally, but I'm kind of sticking my head above water again. I'm going to really mix metaphors left and right, so pay no attention. So that's not a great answer, I know, but I've been inching towards a fourth novel, running a workshop at the library where I work, and yeah, just laying low.
Yeah, and this fourth novel, is this the one that, is based on Vapor Trail?
Yes, that's the one that I was talking. I think last time. And like I said, I took a bit of a hiatus from writing. I wasn't feeling it for a very long time. It was a rough stretch. So, but that's the one. I can see the shore now. But 80% of the work is the last 20%, as the saying goes.
Yeah, yeah. So, in terms of your writing now, what does that routine look like, or when are you doing it? Have you got like your confidence back fully? Is it still an ongoing process?
Oh, it's well. I mean, I'm a writer, so it's always going to be an ongoing
Yeah.
process. It's not that I suck, but a lot of it is digging back, blowing the dust off, six notebooks and the manuscript, and just trying to get my footing again. I've never been able to abandon anything. I've tried really hard, but they keep coming back to me. So, um, yeah, the process is I don't have a routine yet. I know I work best in the mornings,
Mm.
but I haven't reestablished that yet. I right now just stolen moments here and there. I start looking at the manuscript and making notes, and then trying to find a jump point to. I've got it all outlined, it's completed, but something is missing, and I don't know what that is yet, and it's kind of nagging at me. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. That seems to be, the frequent and frustrating problem. There's so often where it's like there's an ingredient missing. Now I've got to find out what it is, and
Yeah.
yeah, no clue.
And of course, a lot of my time was spent with edits on Mother Howl, and that
Yeah,
was weird. It's a manuscript I haven't looked at for 8 years.
right.
So getting notes on that, two rounds of notes, one from my French editor and one from my British editor, um, were all really good, but it's something I was kind of trying to leave behind and move on because I thought it was never going to see daylight. And I'm proud of the book, but sorry, we weren't going to go into that yet, were we? I'll wait for
Well,
you to like open
well,
the doors.
let's get to that now. And it's interesting because the last time we spoke, I deliberately and very consciously didn't mention Mother Hell too much because I knew that it was something that would frequently come up, and you had answered it kind of sufficiently. It was in a kind of publishing hell or a limbo, but here we are now 2 years later, and it is almost upon us. So I'm wondering, when did those conversations? Yeah, yeah, for the video
That's real, yeah.
watchers, it's physically in Craig's hand. But how did this come about? When did those conversations start happening again?
That was so. There's a British imprint of a larger, media company, but a small imprint called Angry Robot. You may be
Mm.
familiar with them. They may have, yeah, the Angry
Yeah,
Robot.
yeah.
And so, um, and they're they're kind of the best of both worlds. They have the mobility and the freedom of a small press, but they've got the financial backing of a larger company behind them. But they're kind of left alone, and the result is kind of what you've seen from them in the science fiction front for the past several years. They're aggressive about walking the walk. You know, writers will always hear, Bob, you probably know this, the editors and agents are always looking for cutting edge, new, bleeding, different, original, etc.
Hmm.
And Angry Robot, if you just kind of scan the catalog, they really mean that, and they and they
Mm.
and
Hmm.
they do it. And so they spun off a crime imprint called Datura. This is the first season they published. They published two folks ahead of me, and that's really it. The my editor Daniel Culver was a fan of the handbook, and so he just tracked down my agent and said, what's collecting dust with Clevenger? What's he doing? So yeah, I had nothing to do with it. My agent had pretty much scraped his Rolodex as far as American publishers go. Um, so I'm not as excited right now as I am relieved. I've said before, I feel like I've been waiting on the side of the road for a tow truck for 20 years, and I can finally
Yeah.
see it in the distance.
Yeah. And I mean, what was it like then going back to it to make those edits? And I wonder too, what kind of editorial changes were made. I mean, obviously, you had been working on this novel for a very long time, so presumably it was, to say it was pretty tight, because I know how meticulous you are, is an exaggeration. And so, I mean, how different is the Mother Hell that we've got now compared to what was submitted to Angry Robot?
I would say that if you had read the manuscript 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and read it now without any with dim recollection of it, except for the larger load-bearing plot points, you probably wouldn't notice any difference. But there was a lot of work. My French editor, Théo Sergeron, did a lot with me. He was fantastic. Mostly, there was a lot of backstory with Lyle, one of the main characters. A lot of his previous relationships, kind of showing his record of dumpster fires that got him to where he is. And my French editor said it really kind of distracted from the relationship, the current one, and it didn't really add anything substantial enough to justify the space. And I agree with him. He was right. I think trimming that was very very helpful. Um, he had a lot of comments I don't recall, but I would say that for all the work, honestly, you wouldn't notice much of a difference. The structure, plot, everything, resolution is all identical. Um, my British editor, Daniel Culver, he was specifically concerned about Icarus's motivation, and that's the one I kind of pushed back a bit. Icarus is the other character. There's two main plot threads that braid together, and I thought it was pretty straightforward, and I pushed back a bit, and we did some back and forth, and I finally had the light bulb click, and that kind of meant for a mad dash to create something that blended in well with the rest of the book, but on very short notice. But I finally saw what he was talking about, and it made sense to me. Does that sort of answer the question, or no?
Yeah, yeah, I think it does. And I mean, sometimes with these conversations, to give people a sense of the book, we ask like, okay, can you give us an elevator pitch? I'm not going to do that
That's
because
fine.
I mean, one, it is kind of bullshit and just like a little sound bite that we sometimes like to put out. Probably if Rob Olson is listening to this, he's like, "Hey, that is the introduction to my episode, you bastard." But well, there you go. In fact, if you want to hear that answer, then listen to to the
Yeah,
first 30 seconds of Arc Party. But
I think
what I will say is, who came first, Lyle or Icarus?
the story started. You've read the book, right? I don't
Yes,
recall.
I
Okay, okay.
have. I have.
So good. I don't want to be talking and like making no sense at all. In between drafts of Dermaphoria, I blasted out a short story called "The Fade." It's one of those rare moments where something just kind of almost comes into my head fully formed with minor edits, and I just knocked that out in the course of a week, just as a breather from Dermaphoria. And I posted it on my website, and it was a letter. Took the form of a letter. It opened with "Dear Lyle." Nothing significant there. I just like that name. I think it's a nice name for a guy. It's a very very friendly name. So I just "Dear Lyle," and I put it aside. And then when I was done with Dermaphoria, I started thinking, who's Lyle? What else is this letter talking about? What's this legacy that's gone into this? And that letter appears in the book in a much longer form. I expanded it, but Lyle came first. uh, Icarus, I can tell you almost everything you need to know about why I did certain things with him or certain plot points. When he came into my brain, that's the one thing I had no recollection of. I honestly couldn't tell you, but he did come after Lyle.
Yeah, yeah. Just give me 1 second. I need to close the window because I left the window open. If we had no video, I could stealthily have done this. But you're gonna think, what the fuck is he doing?
You can you
Hang on.
can you can clip that out, can't you? Or is this all going to go in just
Yeah,
cold
I'll
as it
clip it
is?
out.
Yeah, he'll get it out.
Okay, because you very well might, like I said, might hear the sound of a demonic cat at some point.
No,
Yeah, I've got.
there's very little sound now, but I know that sometimes in the morning they start doing like construction, and it's
Yeah,
like, yeah. Anyway, what were you saying, Bob? Or were you just talking about your own
Well, he was
background?
talking about his cats. I'm like, I got two cats, and one of my cat, her name is Squeaky, and she's
right,
named because of the sound that she makes. So
right.
you may hear her. She occasionally likes to start howling. So, yeah, she's Mother Howl. Yeah.
Well, this will sound positive, like a howler monkey. This will sound like just a demonic screech if it comes up. But she's not in pain. I want to make that clear so you guys don't.
Yeah.
I don't start getting angry letters from animal rights people and such.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
yeah.
So
So
what else?
sorry, I think there was a slight sound overlap. So
Go ahead.
right
Yeah,
up.
I think there's a bit of a delay between us, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, there's the goddamn train on Bob's end. Okay, so I mean, what was it like also going and writing this in the third person? Because I mean, a lot of people, I guess, more familiar with your first person writing.
I I've always taken really to heart this notion of hooking the reader out of the gate, and I think there's definite merit to that. But the more I read, there's plenty of books out there that really put some faith in the reader. They're not boring. They don't take their sweet ass time, but they don't necessarily fire them out of a cannon at the opening sentence. And I really wanted to slow down and let this book breathe a little bit. Um, and plus, I wrote in the first person most of my life,
Mm,
up until a certain point, or excuse me, third person. I was very comfortable with that. First person, I think, allows for more intimacy with a narrator. Third person, I kept it limited, but it wasn't that difficult to transition. In fact, it was a nice break from my usual routine. especially again going, I'm doing a limited third person, so it's third, but I'm kind of constraining it to the perceptions of the two characters, the two narratives, and they're very different people. So it was a lot of fun going back and forth between those two.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, of course, there's so many thematic concerns and areas we could jump into. So, of course, one thing that this is concerned with is relationships and specifically families. Now, we spoke a little bit about life lessons previously when we spoke on the podcast, but I guess something we didn't get into too deeply, and maybe there was a reason for that, is your own relationship with your parents. So I'm wondering, what was that like?
Oh, I'm hesitant to go there. It was kind of, I mean, I was raised strict Roman Catholic, so it's a little rocky. My father died about a year ago, not about, exactly a year ago, November 2nd. And we were getting closer to each other towards the end of his life. We were not for a long time, but towards the last 10 years or so, before his brain kind of started to give way, we got closer. Um, the relationships in this book, though, are really more. My first two novels, there's relationships, but there's a very adolescent, I think, sense of love. Um, John Vincent is just scrambling for acceptance by anyone and has a disproportionate degree of heartache for things that are not healthy relationships. So he was very adolescent in that way. Eric Ashworth was a little better, not much. And I just wanted somebody, I wanted a narrator to just fucking grow up, is what I wanted. And so this was really, Lyle Lyle having all this baggage and all these things that are driving him to do what he does. But at the end of the day, he's got to just pull his head out and understand that he's not the center of the universe anymore. He has a wife and an infant daughter that he
Mm,
needs to think about first. So the relationships here, this was just more about just kind of growing up and taking yourself, not centering yourself in the world, kind of looking outward rather than inward, if that makes any sense at all.
yeah, yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
does.
It seems like he had to grow up very quickly, but that was basically stunted his ability to grow as a person.
Yeah.
So, and then he had to grow up again because of all the circumstances that happened to him. And it forced him because, like you said, it's like, he had to grow up initially because of what was happening to him in his life and how others were treating him after, we find out what his father's been doing and how his life was just basically completely rearranged. So he, basically, invents himself.
Hmm.
But I felt that he was stunted, and you're right, he was centered because you have to be. You don't have a choice at that point.
Yeah.
You would have to be. I mean, I could put myself in the same situation, and I know what I would have to do. Anytime that I've ever been in any type of trouble, and that's only affected me, then obviously I'm the only one who can fix it.
Hmm.
And he felt that this was the only way he could fix this issue.
Yeah.
But that centering wouldn't allow him to actually grow up as a human being. It took other trauma, it took other things. It took him almost losing everything he had to really come to grips with his humanity. So I really like how that played out because you can see that, it's like, he grew up really fast. He wasn't an adolescent. He was an adult,
Yeah.
but he wasn't like an adult in mind and heart, you know.
Yeah. He's take. I mean, you're right. The protective measures he took, the extreme measures he took when he was a teenager, were the right thing to do in
Right.
probably most respects. There's a few things people might take issue with, and maybe I do, but he had to survive. He was going to die if he didn't change something. But now, as an adult, he's got this name that his wife has taken, and he has not told her the truth about it. She knows he changed it. She assumes it was a legal name change. And now their daughter has it. It's on their birth certificate. And so now this lie is getting passed down. And that's when he figures out, and not on his own. His wife says, "That's it. I'm not going to spoil anything," but she says she throttles him and says, "Pull your head out," as does his friend from the program. So it's only when when his mistakes start that are centered on himself, when the repercussions of those affect more than just him. That's when he realizes he's in neck deep and he's got to do something.
And it goes to show that those things parallel, like a legacy almost, because of the things that his father did,
Yeah,
that were centered around him, how that actually started to affect other people in his life. And you see a parallel up to a point. You see what his father's done, not going to change, won't grow. And then you have Lyle, who, he's at almost at the same point, not as severe, but pretty much like, hey, I'm fucked, and he has the only way he can do it is to listen and go, you know what, I'm gonna end this legacy.
And it's really being cornered. It's he's not a violent killer. He's a good guy, but
Right.
everything else he's doing in his mind is, barring violence, everything else he's doing, he goes, this is he's thinking this is what my father would do. He does not want to be like his father.
Right.
He spent his life trying not to be, and realizes he was, he's doing the opposite effect, and so he has to make a big change. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that came across. I honestly wasn't conscious of any of this at the time I was writing. I was just trying to just grope my way through the story in the dark for several years.
The thing is that I don't think we're ever really conscious of these themes until we start to examine the story. We don't write, well, I'm going to write about this, and I'm going to write about a relationship and about somebody who's not going to grow, and how this legacy, whoever writes like that, if they can pull it off, then damn, shit, let me know who you are. But what matters most is a story.
Yeah.
And these themes develop later. They're inherent because they're universal, if that makes any kind of sense.
It does, and I know plenty of writers who actually consider theme very deeply and work, and it's part of the arsenal they go in with. I've always had a very rocky relationship with theme. My attitude is, I always liken adults to, airline attendants. Like, we're all on life's journey, and the only difference between us and the passengers is that we do this all the time. We've been on the plane more than you have, and it's our job to keep the kids with, movies and snacks and blankets, metaphors for food and shelter, right? You get that. But the honest truth is, none of us really know how to fly the fucking plane, and none of us knew who really is flying the plane. That's what I think adulthood is. We're all just making it up as we go to try to do the best we can for the next generation. So my attitude, what do I know? I am really reluctant to come in with a message of any kind.
Right.
The things that, you asked me, Michael, about my relationship with my parents, and I think before you were asking about trauma and stuff, and this is not stuff that I lead with. I just figure whatever's back here in the under the cellar door of my brain is going to bleed through if I just focus on the story. So I have a very rocky relationship with theme. I let it speak for itself. I just try to, brick the thing together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, something that is throughout this is, of course, you can change your name, but it won't change who you are. It won't change where you came from. I mean, this is pretty much what the cameo from our friend from the Contortionist Handbook makes us aware of. And I think, that just bleeds so throughout this story. I mean, that is always at the back and often at the front of Lyle's mind. He's so aware of who he is, even if on paper there's a different name.
Yeah, and his friend from the recovery program says the same thing. In a different way. I mean, he makes it very clear he's he's the same person. He's just making different choices, and he has to consider those in incremental daily steps. And here's a guy who just has we don't know any details. We just know there's some wreckage in his background.
Yeah, yeah. And when you think about family, what do you think are some misconceptions about family?
Oh, I don't know. Misconceptions about family. I think family is. I think the family you choose is more important than the family that that's your blood. I think there's a lot of misplaced reverence for this notion of family when in fact, and I'm not trying to slam families. I mean, good thing, great. I know plenty of people have them, right? It's how we keep going. But the fact is that Andrew Vax wrote about this a lot, and more eloquently than I can say. But he talks about like the circle of trust, like the people that more often than not that do the greatest damage are people inside that circle. They're often family members, extended family members, or outside the family, but in a larger circle of trust, people in trusted authority positions, clergy, excuse me, teachers, we all know the list, right? So this notion of preserving, like family above all else, well, if a relative, was molesting you as a kid, I'm not going to take a bullet for this notion of family unless that
Mm,
person's taken to the mat and called out, and people have the back of the victim. But and this is a lot of what was coming up in writing this was how often, again, I grew up Roman Catholic, and I've seen over and over how the wagons are circled, how people rally to the defense of someone who's accused, and the accuser ends up, the one with the scarlet letter. And people don't do this for attention or money or fame, doing it even for all the best reasons, even if they come out on top legally, it wreaks havoc on their life. So this reverence for family is I just don't have it. At least family of blood. And granted, I have blood family that I love dearly. There's no question there. Let's be clear. But I don't know what the equivalent is in the UK there, Michael. But I think Bob can back me up. I mean, anyone who's had a large Thanksgiving meal with a bunch of extended relatives and politics come up, things can get pretty bloody ugly. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
to say nothing if there's an ex or a step or uncle or somebody who sexually abused someone years ago, then and everyone's acting like it never happened. I mean, yeah, that's my biggest misconception about family is that this blood family is sacrosanct above all else. I really just have never bought that.
Mm-hmm.
Is
yeah.
that too grim of an answer for your audience? I don't know. Is that...
Oh no,
No, no, no.
we frequently go pretty dark and get pretty grim, and I mean it. It makes me think. Can there ever be, or should there ever be, such a thing as unconditional love? Because surely all love has to come with conditions to a certain point. You know.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote about it. I did a big Facebook post when my father died, and he said, one of the things he said to me, last things, he goes, I love you, even if you were an axe murderer, I would still love you, and I believe him. And that was, he said that to me while I was still working on this book, and I got to thinking, and I don't think it's a bad thing to feel that way or say that. You're right, but I think and I don't want to say, well, what should those conditions be? It's not. I mean, I'm not married. I don't have children. I could do a complete 180 on so many levels if those things ever happened, right? But wait, hang on. Let me reel my thought back in. Where am I going with that? It's yeah. So writing this was the thing that kept drifting through my mind was how many people love their axe murderers, and because a betrayal like that, back to the family at Thanksgiving acting like everything's fine and like it's now's not the time to talk about it. It's a holiday. Let's not upset people. We've all heard those sorts of things, I'm sure. This idea that, God damn, where's my brain today? Uh, Nobody wants to believe that someone they profoundly love, not just love, but someone they have that is years of their life are intertwined with, right? A husband, a sibling, parent, whatever. No one wants to believe that person is a monster. That's why when the daughter says, her the stepfather's molesting her, 99 times out of 100, it's, you're lying, you little bitch, don't ever say that again. She just, and the abuse goes on, right? Nobody wants to believe that their loved one is a monster, because to accept that is to suddenly render void years of your life. And you're staring into Nietzsche's abyss right there. And nobody can do that. So the idea behind Lyle really was, what if this happened, and what if he just believed it? Instead of circling the wagons or
Mm.
denying it, or what if he just said, yeah, okay. What if he just, that abyss, what if he just dove straight into it? That's really what the story was about.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too, and I mean it's kind of getting into spoilery territory, so there's a little warning for people. But I mean, of course he accepts it, but I feel he really has to face it and to confront it when he receives the letter that
Mm-hmm.
is, intended for his father from his grandfather, and then all of the things that are set in motion after that. I mean, this this story, I mean, it was a pacey story fraught with tension throughout, but when you get to that point, it's about the 60% mark. I know that because I was reading it on Kindle, and so it gives
Oh,
you a
right. Okay.
number. But when you get to that point, I said to Bob, you don't just turn it up to 11, you turned it up to 12. It
Oh,
really
thanks.
absolutely goes to the next level. And Lyle not only has to confront, what happened, but I mean, again, we're getting into spoiler territory. That there is a physical, in-person confrontation. It is not as satisfying as it would be in a movie. It seems a bit silly to say because it's not a movie. This is real life, and but that's how I feel when I'm reading it. I mean, this is the mastery of your fiction. When you're in that moment, it doesn't feel like you're reading a book. It feels like this is what's happening because this is reality. This is, yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you. It's and that's I know what you mean, and that's I'm taking that exactly the right way. That was my intention.
Mm,
First, I don't think spoiler. I would think that most people would assume, okay, at some point he's going to have to go head to head with this guy. He's going to have to
mm,
track him down. I mean, that just seems kind of obvious, but maybe not. Whatever. But it was important to me that Lyle did not leave that meeting, that face to face with his father. Lyle did not leave that prison with any tidy sense of closure. I did not want that. I did not want any kind of artificial sense of that was the turning point for Lyle. I did not want that. In fact, part of it is there's a grand tradition in crime fiction of the killer, the hero and the villain squaring off. Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter, the Michael Bay's, the De Niro Pacino scene in Heat. I mean, there's no way I'm going to throw my hat into that ring. That ground has been covered by far greater than I, so I'm not going to do that. But what I wanted was to not give Lyle even a sense of closure, not give him even the satisfaction of his father denying anything, because even the denial gives substance to the accusation. I wanted his father to just kind of dodge, deflect, and and have that malice about him. I wanted that, but never give anything that Lyle could hook into. And at the same time, I wanted it clear that this guy, as much of a monster as he may be, genuinely loves his son. And I think that may be that's not something I see covered. You hear people about so and so murdered X amount of people, but by day he was a loving husband and father, and it's almost like it's presented as though it's an act, and maybe it was. I wanted it clear that this man had genuine affection for his son, and that lived alongside of his other, his capacity for everything else he did. And I did not, like you said, it wasn't satisfying. I did not want that tied up neat satisfaction. I wanted that sensation of I just don't want to be in a room with that guy ever again.
Yeah.
I just see
Yeah.
your cat skulking in the background there, Bob.
Yeah, she was howling a minute ago, but there's no telling what she's doing now.
She's plotting your death. She's right behind you. Don't move.
No, she does love me unconditionally.
Animals, animals
So,
is different. I get that.
yeah, uh, but I love how you didn't give him any closure, and I didn't really think about that until you said it. But I mean, it kind of speeds the rest of the story along because there's that need for closure. He didn't get it there, and then at that point right there, it's like I feel like, hey, I'm getting closer to this closure that I'm seeking. I really don't know what it is, but man, have I royally fucked up because I did something that I shouldn't have done, and there is a record of it, and they're going to get me
Yeah,
because my PO is a dick,
yeah,
and and I don't know. It's like that scene that you have with when he gets pulled over,
yeah.
and the cop says something about his parole officer or PO officer, and I just cracked up because I said that is the best description of Officer Reed that I could have ever heard,
I'm
and
trying
that
which
was like
when he comes to visit him, or when he's visiting him when he has to do a drug screening, or I don't remember.
no, what he does, what he's talking about when he gets pulled over by the cops, and the cops let him go. It's
Oh
like,
yeah,
oh man, his PO's Reed,
oh yeah.
you know, and it's like, carry on, son.
Even even
You
the
got
cops
enough problems.
don't like him. Even the cops don't like him. So
Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah, and that's I've also done a lot of road tripping. I hate flying. I love a good road trip, and I've seen my share of out of the way gas station bathrooms. So I figured, that was kind of my ode to all of them. And if you've done enough road tripping, they too many look like that.
Yeah, that's I don't know, man. I haven't been pulled over in a long time, but there's this inherent fear,
Yeah,
and no matter what, and being it's just and being in Texas, I've always felt that fear because it's like, shoot, man, I did something wrong, you know, and I mean, I'm on felony probation. I have like basically 10 and a half months left.
Okay.
So getting pulled over for me is I can basically appreciate what I was going through, you
Yeah.
know, because I mean, it's like you get scared. It's like, what happens if I get a ticket? And they're like, well, you go to court and you pay your ticket, And I'm like, but that's going to give them, well, as long as you're not doing anything else, then you don't have to worry about anything else. But if you're doing something else, they're going to find out, you know. So I try to like avoid being pulled over,
Yeah, I don't know
But
how.
it's just
I mean, wait. In Texas, I'm trying to remember. Do they have those wide Smokey Bear hats? Those things scare the piss out of me. I see those.
that's your state troopers.
Yeah, those. It's those hats. Just put the fear of more than anything else, the fear of God. Now, Michael, I don't know how it is in the UK or Japan. I remember my French editor at one point he made a note like, like, what is this guy's problem with cops? Why is he so afraid of them? And I said, oh, that's adorable. French cops just must be wonderful people. I had to explain to him we have a very different situation out here with law
Mm.
enforcement. And I say this, with friends in law enforcement. So,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, generally speaking, it's only in my adulthood where I'm always nervous when they're in my rearview mirror because I know, like, you follow anybody long enough, you can pull them over. But I don't tremble like I did when I was younger. Even totally sober with nothing, I would just go, "Oh crap, there's a cop behind me." It's not the case anymore. I don't know how it is again, Michael, what they're like in the UK or Japan, but
Yeah, I think it's difficult, to fully appreciate the situation in America, because I haven't been pulled over by a cop. I mean, like, I don't feel that they do it as frequently as at least the media and my friends would suggest it happens in America. And of course, I mean, in any system, anywhere where there is power, there is corruption, there is the ability to take advantage of that, but I don't think it's happening on the level that it's happening in America. I mean, in in Japan, I think there is like a fear from some kind of like foreigners such as myself living here that like often if there's a situation where the police come along and there's a foreigner and a Japanese person, that typically they will take the side of the Japanese person, but that is not something that I have experienced personally. I mean, something they will do is not necessarily pulling over, but just in the street, they may approach random foreigners just to do a kind of ID check and check that
yeah,
all their papers are in order and that they should be here. Depends on the person how they react to that. I have a number of friends that they're like, you shouldn't be doing this, so they will be quite resistant to it unless everything they're asking for is completely above board. Whereas, for me, if I just want to see my ID, then I'm going to show them my ID because I'd rather that I just comply with that and then I get to go on my way. Because if I don't, then it could escalate into a nastier situation. And then they're looking for things to kind of, I guess, like trip me up over. And um, in Japan, you can be held for it's a long time. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't want to kind of quote the wrong information, but there is a long time, like days, weeks, possibly months, that you can be held without a lawyer.
wow,
That's fine. That's just a thing that can be done. And of course, if you don't speak the language, then that if you're not even entitled to a lawyer, you're certainly not given a translator. So
wow,
that there is a reason why the conviction rate and the success rate of solving crimes is so high. So I'll say that. But fortunately, I've not really had any trouble with authority figures. I mean, I I've visited the police station about like a few matters, and I'm currently involved in a divorce and a custody battle, so I'm getting
Uh,
far more familiar with the courts and the legal system here. But I've had nothing like kind of being pulled over or anything like that. But I'm aware, of course, that corruption does exist.
one of the people I had helping me out on this was a friend of mine. He was a retired deputy sheriff, and I met him when I was on jury duty. And the people doing the courthouse security, the deputies there, and a lot of them were cadets, were just pricks. This guy was
Mm,
lovely. He was the bailiff in the courtroom where the jury was held, and they were screening us, and they asked, when it came my turn. I didn't think I'd be selected to be on the jury because I said I'm a crime writer,
mm,
and but I ended up on the jury. And first day of not the first day. It was soon after the trial started. I'm sitting in the box and we're getting ready to go, and the bailiff is at his desk, and I see that he's reading the handbook. So we got to know each other afterwards, and so I was able to track him down and get some help from him about some of the logistics describing the jail and incarceration and the procedures and all that. So that was my research for that.
mm,
Otherwise, I almost got somebody, a guy pretending to be a cop when I was living in Bolivia, tried to get me to show papers and that. And I was in the middle of the night. I was out walking by myself and probably in a neighborhood I shouldn't have. And I didn't believe he was a cop. And so I just ducked down a one-way street. And my roommate down there worked for the Migracion, and he said I did the right thing because cops, at least in that city, don't have cars. So he had sort of a vaguely cop looking car and a green
mm.
military shirt on, but he goes, "It's too poor. We don't have cars. They drop them off, and if they stop you, they get in the car with you to go to the station to write you up. They don't." So that guy had bad intentions. That's probably
Yeah,
the worst one I've had, but he was technically not a cop either. So
yeah, yeah. How
Shit,
long were
that's
you in
scary, man.
Bolivia for?
what's that?
How long
Uh,
were you in Bolivia for?
I wish I'd been there longer. I was there for like 3 months. I didn't travel around. I was just, it was during the big fallout with my old publisher, and I was just out of money and almost on the skids. And my old friend of mine lived down there, Wendy Dale. She's a writer as well. She had I emailed her about, look, how can I stretch my money in South America? I can't live in the Bay Area anymore. And she said, I've got a room, come on down. And that was that.
Yeah,
So yeah, I wish I'd been there longer. Anyway, yeah, so that's what I was there for.
yeah. Do you have any, I guess, like desire or plans to live in other countries besides America right now? Is that even logistically possible?
My plan right now is to get my place put together on my stretch of nowhere in the Mojave Desert. I will probably I'd like to say my traveling days are over. I lived out of a plane for years. People asked where, I would just say I lived in Heathrow. I'm really sick of traveling. I burned out a long time ago. So no, I mean, other than like the fact that I think the U.S. is verging on its own internal apocalypse, but I
Mm,
still don't know where else I would go. So I'm just going to try to get set up in the middle of nowhere and be left alone.
yeah, yeah. That is not a bad plan. And I mean, yeah, if you're in the middle of the Mojave Desert, it doesn't seem like there'll be a lot of people who bother you. It's quite impressive that you found a roommate, really, if you're in such a remote location.
I'm not there right now, but yeah, no, but for a while I stayed at Rob Roberge's cabin out in the middle of nowhere and just loved it. So yeah,
Yeah,
So that's the
Yeah.
long-term plan. So I don't know. I mean, there are days when I think the U.S. is going to implode, and other days when I don't. I never know. Just never
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about the US and systems, of course, a lot of this book too, like sheds a real light on, mental health and the medical system. And so, I mean, of course, it's pretty obvious to, to know where that's coming from. I don't think we need to ask, oh, why did you decide to write about that? But I mean, what was it like in terms of exploring that, and what did you do in terms of like research and more in terms of just like experience, living in that system?
A lot of it's experience. I mean, I haven't had I haven't had health insurance for the last 20 years, and right now, just getting on the Obamacare, as they call it, is just finally got caught up with some taxes and pulled my shit together so I can get that taken care of. But beyond that, it's just like it's really a tangled mess. Even when I had health insurance, I was having routinely having insurance companies somehow override a doctor's prescription, and they would give me half of what was prescribed for whatever reason. Like the insurance companies, it's ridiculous. The system here is just ridiculous. I used to think I needed to, I used to, when I was younger, regretted not having any kind of job that gave me some real street cred. It was very naive of me, and I hear that word from someone now, and I just tune them out. I stop listening. It's just that's a mark of naivete. I always thought I needed to have some bitter, down to earth, and I'm not sure what kind of job I would have been talking about, right? But I think years of working under fluorescent lights at soul sucking companies, I've tapped into that more than I ever thought I would, just in terms of like for this, I wasn't interested in portraying the system as evil necessarily, simply as, but rather as just overtaxed, understaffed, underfunded, overworked, and the people the system is a particular institution is meant to serve are being underserved. And you work enough grim office jobs and get lectures about cost cutting and layoffs, or memos go around about please use less copy toner. Like, you get really savvy to that. Uh, and I've tapped into that more than I thought I would. It's been much more valuable when I want to look at something and just portray the daily grind and the lack of institutional support. That's really where all that came from. Um, with Dr. Finn, he was not meant to be an adversary. He was just meant to be just over fucking worked
Mm.
and just beleaguered. Uh, that's really what I was going after. I mean, and there's plenty to say about the injustice, privatized medicine and all of that, but um, I wanted to focus on, at least where there's some good to be done, how little attention is going to that particular resource, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm wondering, on a practical level, as someone who has no health insurance, I mean, what do you do, or what would you do if you get a medical condition where it's serious and you need like a lot of treatment? I mean, I assume it's something, that probably makes up your nightmares. You kind of think about this from time to time, but I mean, do, does one just, you know, try to? I mean, I know the kind of money, so it almost seems to try and raise that money is almost inconceivable. I mean, we've all seen the lengths that Walter White went to on Breaking Bad,
Yeah,
so yeah,
yeah.
it's a fair bit of cash that is required. But
Well, most
do you look at getting treatment in other countries? Is that a better plan at that point?
Most people, like in the U.S., a lot of people, like when they had the Vegas shooting, a lot of those people ended up doing, GoFundMe,
Mm,
campaigns to raise money, which should tell you everything you want to know about the U.S. right there. A
yeah,
guy who legally acquired a fuck ton of arms legally, shot a bunch of people who even gainfully employed with health
yeah,
insurance couldn't take care of things. So anyway, enough of that rant. I don't think about that. I think if anything like terminal came along, I would just, honestly, I don't know. I would probably just say, so what's this heroin stuff all about anyway? And I would just move out to nowhere and just live as peaceably as I could, as pain free as I could until, barring that, I don't know. I think right now the best I can probably do is just take what little nest egg I've got and just hand it
mm,
all over as a down payment and, just be in debt forever.
yeah,
I mean, they can't hold you for lack of payment, and they can't turn you away. But I mean, I did blow my back out one time where I was literally just could not move, and the bill I got for the guys that got me to the hospital, I could have hired a limousine and half a dozen strippers to carry me there. It was ridiculous. But I ended up, having to like plunk down a chunk of cash and then just, try to pay it off. That's the best I could do. It's not a good system. Hopefully I
no,
can change that, not personally the system, but hopefully, like I said, get my act together and get some insurance here and for what good it will do.
yeah, yeah,
But for the most part, these last, many years I've been paying out of pocket when I got to go to a doctor.
yeah,
It's not
yeah.
easy. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel again that although I'm obviously aware of the system in America, that again, being outside of it is going to be difficult for me to fully appreciate, what you're dealing with. But I certainly understand, that the friends from America in Japan who say, that they want to stay here because of health insurance. Like, even if, Japan itself is not quite the right fit for them or they have issues with the country, it's like the health insurance that
Yeah.
is what's keeping me here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have people who've moved to foreign countries for the same, similar reasons, among others. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the primary reason I have a job.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate my job,
I'm sorry. That's a drag.
and but without it, I would have no insurance. I'm basically I've got good modern diabetes doctors now that are actually working to get me off of insulin. Because they're like, hey, you can't, you just really, it's not good to be on the stuff forever. You need to try to change some things in your life, and we're gonna by chemicals, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna make you do some life. So I'm on Ozempic. Nausea is my middle name.
Oh, wow.
Uh, so it's like, hey, yeah, I can eat that, and then 3 bites later, I'm like, I'm done. I don't want to eat no more. So, but without insurance, my insulin would be $3,000 a month,
Good God.
which is pretty much what I make after taxes.
Yeah. Good God. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm I gotta work. So I just, I go to my job and I try to have as much fun there as I possibly can, which is not easy to do. But yeah,
Part of what
so
I want to do is just kind of show two different people's experience with that kind of Kafka labyrinth,
hmm
Lyle in his own, I mean, while he's kind of stuck in it in a weird way, he's also kind of mastered it. He really knows it's tedious, but he knows his way around. He knows the rubber stamps and the forms, and he can kind of glide through it. Whereas Icarus, the longer he stays, the longer he kind of sheds his memory of what he thinks was his life in the sky.
hmm
He keeps butting up against that, one catch 22 after the next. that's the other thing I was trying to kind of maybe shine a light on as well.
Yeah, and with Icarus, of course, I mean, there's so much in terms of like mythology and biblical kind of things coming into it too. I don't know. It's like it's a weird thing to say, but I almost Icarus wasn't a character that I expected in a Clevenger story, but then as I read it, he made total sense. And there's not really a question attached to that, I suppose, more of just an observation. And I am interested, even more into what it was like getting into that Icarus mindset.
It was actually quite easy. That was among the easier parts of the book. I mean, the storyline where he goes was, I kind of battled with that for a long time. But Icarus himself was a real break, because I had this idea that, excuse me, if he's if he's a celestial entity suddenly incarnate and the language has sort of been downloaded into his brain all at once, Matrix style, right? Well, then he's going to cherry pick meaning where he finds it. So I just had fun kind of just winging it with his lingo. And it was nice to kind of just set aside the strictures of, formal English for a little while and just have some fun with him. That and just not wanting this gentle, beatific, I mean, literally angelic figure. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He doesn't know why he's here. He doesn't like being here, and he wants to get his assignment, do his job, and go home. Um, um, and I wanted to be careful with that because the last angel that wasn't satisfied and thought they could do better, that was, in biblical lore, that was Lucifer. And I did not want that to be the case with Icarus. As far as the Greek mythology goes, I'm not really savvy with it. I like the name. I think it's a beautiful name. So I named him Icarus, but it also seemed to fit, crashing from the sky. For me, he was fun. He was a nice breather, and I wanted somebody who could always have a line in the sand with people and always have that line in the sand respected. The world is his china shop, but he's a very gentle bull, although you wouldn't know it. So yeah, he was very easy to write. Strangely enough, I saw. I was volunteering in the Bay Area at the at a needle exchange, the AIDS Foundation needle exchange, and I just remember at one point there was a guy outside one of the SROs having a smoke. Big guy wearing a three-piece suit, bare feet with no shirt, and somehow he pulled it off. He actually he rocked it, and that's
Mm,
visually where that suit came from. That's why I dressed him that way. We were used to we would supply fresh gear to addicts. It sort of kept it,
mm,
it kept them from exchanging needles and transmitting, infections, as well as reusing gear, which is dangerous. It gets blunt and it can cause abscesses and sores, and discarding it on beaches and parks. So the program was very effective in terms of rounding that stuff up, and we would have sterile water and little like tea candle foil things almost for boiling everything, as well as needles. You had long, shorts, and micros that were a combination of needle and barrel size. And if you didn't have any needles to exchange at all, you could at least get 20 for the asking. So I would sit there all day, and people would come in and ask for 20 long. I need 20 long. Can I get 20 long? And it took me about a year for that to click in my brain. I was trying to think of a name for my street surgeon, and finally 20 long. It
mm.
took a while, embarrassingly so, but that's where that name came from. If you
Yeah,
remember 20 long, I'm
I
not
do.
sure.
I do. I do. Yeah. And I mean, so how long were you working there for then?
I was volunteering there for a couple of years just on
Yeah,
weekends. Yeah.
yeah.
I was bartending and would close the night before, so getting there the next morning was really a nightmare. But yeah, I did that for a couple of years.
Oh yeah. I imagine there was little, if any, sleep those days.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but I mean, for a a very good cause at least.
yeah.
I mean, and talking about Icarus as well, I mean, I don't think we're going to find in any book dialogue so distinct as it is with Icarus. Oh, hang on, my apartment door has just gone. Let me answer that.
Not a smoke alarm, is it?
Oh, hang on, my girlfriend's getting the door. I didn't know she was up. Let's see. let's let's.
Yeah, like I said, I enjoyed throwing the strictures aside, and after a while, it wasn't just gibberish. I mean, obviously, but it was like I almost came up with it was fairly consistent. It was a lot of just transposing of, excuse me, standard prefixes and suffixes, and juxtaposing. I think I've said this elsewhere. Qualicated instead of qualified. Skepticize. I mean, not a whole lot, but every now and then a turn of phrase that I threw out, I put in his mouth to work. It was just fun, and and after a while, that started to inform like his eyes on the world too. And I was always conscious of writing from the standpoint of someone who is, or at least believes, that this flesh and bone is brand new and how limiting and inadequate it is for him. So, wrapped in monkey leather, I think he calls it.
Yeah,
So, so yeah, I that makes me happy. That's good to hear. I had a lot of fun writing him. I don't think we'll ever see him again. I enjoy my
yeah,
John Vincent cameos, but Icarus is done. He did his job. So
yeah, yeah. And I know that you said previously that, when you're writing, you take the dialogue out and you examine that separately. So you're laying it out like a screenplay. And I mean,
mm,
I guess because you told me that before, I was then conscious of it with Mother Howl, and to be honest, I mean, it would have worked as a story if it was literally just the dialogue. I mean, I'm glad that we got all the narrative as well, but I mean, it's so tight and you can say so much when you're not saying a lot at all, if that makes sense. I guess in the same way that we see with a number of minimalist writers. I mean, the language in each word is precise. It's obvious that you pour over this meticulously.
yeah, I didn't really have to do as much noodling with his dialogue because with everybody else, I mean, like I said, my intention is to make sure that it's distinct from the narrator's voice and from each other, from all the characters. Icarus was fine. I mean, not to say I didn't work it, rework it and such, but I didn't have to get out my little watchmaker's tools and jeweler's loop and pick through it like I normally do. It was colorful enough on its own, and yeah, I mean, the other part of the reason for doing that is to make sure that the dialogue can carry a scene, um, that it's not just the narrator, the author, kind of spoon feeding that the characters are doing the heavy lifting. One of the big changes, now that you mentioned it, you asked earlier,
Mm.
was my French editor. My first few drafts of the book, I was really working to portray Lyle's uncertainty and tension and insecurity throughout. And he didn't stutter, strictly speaking, but I did have I worked very hard to make him sound very natural and realistic. That is, even like if you listen to the way I was talking just now, stopping mid sentence and starting over, or pausing when it doesn't necessarily make sense to, well, the speaker's brain works something out and then they start again, or stopping and switching words and then continuing. I had a lot of that with Lyle, and my French editor, rightfully so, Teo, said it is realistic. It reads like it's spot on dialogue, but it does weigh it down after a bit.
Mm,
It doesn't serve the story. It's not moving along. We know he says I okay, I'm sorry, here, listen to me. Things like that. I had every little I and pause and comma, and there's some of
mm,
that still in there, but most of it was stripped out. That was a big change from my first. Oh, that's right. I originally wrote this. I was testing writing without quotation marks. I really wanted to make the dialogue distinct enough to stand without them and have the
mm,
aesthetics of no quotation marks, but still make the dialogue clear. And my editor said, just put the quotes in.
right.
And so that was a huge pain in the ass because there's no shortcut to that. And I there's probably some, and I think there's one or two that still snuck through.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a lot of legwork, that one.
Yeah. Was there much resistance when you'd been asked to do that? I mean, you'd made this stylistic choice and then yeah, you gotta put them all back in again.
It was a stylistic choice, but the fact is, my editor deals with more books and more readers than I do.
Yeah.
So there's, I trusted him, and I think it was the right move on his part, definitely.
Yeah. Does that mean the experiment with no quotation marks is over? Is it something you'd consider doing again?
I think I might. I think it served its purpose for me because you know, I've always been writing dialogue separately, again, to make it distinct. So that for me was an exercise in, how clear can I make the dialogue? How much weight can I put on the dialogue? If it's visually transparent, can the reader still hook into it? And I think that upped my dialogue game a little better, and it's not necessary to torture readers that way.
Mm,
Some people can pull it off. Will Christopher Bear does it quite well. I do not.
right.
So I'll leave it to him.
Okay. And I mean, something that you touched on with Rob Olson is, I mean, your fiction often feels very violent, but there's not ever any violence on the page. It's about the the aftermath of the violence. It's about how people deal with the unpleasantness, to completely understate it, within life. And I mean, when I heard that in the interview, it was like a kind of revelationary moment, kind of like in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where you realize you're not actually seeing these kills, in the original, but you manage to imbue this these stories with a sense that there is graphic violence, there is like graphic abuse, but it doesn't happen. It's about how people deal with it.
Yeah, there's no violence on the page. There's no the sex in all three of my books, probably the fourth one, I mean, would total 2.5 pages maybe.
Mm,
Yeah, so that's why I always kind of push back when someone says my work is dark or
yeah.
transgressive. It doesn't bother me, as much as it used to, obviously, because I'm in the transgressive anthology. But yeah, I think what I wanted was, again, if the story is about Lyle centering his family, moving the center of his world outside of his own ego, looking out, that's when he starts to really think. I mean, he knows what his father did, but it's that's when it starts to really creep into his mind exactly what it must have been like for someone else to be, that be the last thing in life they see. And he
Mm,
starts thinking about that, and that's where the transition happens. There's also a trend in crime fiction to really fetishize the violence, and I didn't want to be doing that. Um,
mm,
uh, Fetishize the female victims of the violence as well. There's a lot of that, and there's a lot of cultural pushback to that, as well. But there it seems to happen anyway, and so I wanted to make sure that I made the descriptions of these people, um, who are also nameless. That's part of why they're untuned. They've been forgotten. But I wanted, when Icarus sees them, I wanted them to be distinct and not the standard descriptions I read of female characters. And I just wanted the violence to be in their eyes, not like shown, you
mm.
know, in graphic description and detail. And because Lyle and Icarus both feel that.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like when you meet someone who you know has been through a lot of these like hugely violent things. You don't need to witness that. You can see it in their face, in the way they conduct themselves, in the way that they speak, and that is something that is completely captured within your work.
Thanks. Yeah. And a lot of it too is just he's had a baby, so suddenly life is very different, and that's the
Oh
ship
yeah.
begins there, and so he starts to connect those two things as well.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I think, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned transgressive fiction as well, because I feel that, particularly in recent years, the definition of transgressive has become so broad that it's almost become meaningless. Like, I'm not entirely sure now what people mean when they say this is a transgressive piece of fiction. I feel it used to have a stricter definition, but now so many writers just doing something even a little different from the established norms, that's now transgressive. And I'm not sure what does and what doesn't make something transgressive these days.
And that's why I don't really attack anybody who does go down that, because it has a lot of meanings, and I don't know what their meaning is.
Mm,
All I can say for myself is I'm not trying to transgress anything. I'm not trying to shock
mm,
or get under anybody's skin. I'm trying to I want to engage my reader, and I want to have them forget their reading. I would like to move them emotionally in some way, and that involves kind of a mutual exchange between reader and writer. Whereas shocking someone, you're doing that kind of from a place of comfort, from a place where you're poking someone else where you can't be hurt. Um, I don't want to be doing that. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in being, if that's what transgressive is, if it's attacking social norms or whatever. Not interested. I'm interested in engaging an individual reader and
mm,
moving them as profoundly as I can.
yeah, yeah.
It sounds a bit grandiose, pardon me, but that's, yeah, I don't know how else to put it.
No, no, I think it makes sense. And I mean, you said before that when you're working on something, you put everything into it. You write that as if it's your last piece, because one day it surely will be. And I mean, I wonder too, I mean, as someone who just works on one piece at a time, is this experience of, you're promoting Mother Howl, the release is imminent, but you're also working on the novel. Is there a bit of a disconnect? Has this been difficult to get into this mode where I suppose you're being forced to work on two stories at once. I know that Mother Howl is of course done, but you've got to be in that mindset for the promotion of the book.
No, it doesn't, because it's not like I'm writing something else, and it's funny because I haven't. I mean, I finished this book a long time ago, and even though I did the edits recently for both editors, we were talking earlier about theme and ideas and what message a writer may have, and you know, it's only in this part of the book release that I really start thinking about this stuff, that I start getting questions like this and kind of thinking back. And slowly after, the questions, there's a lot of overlap with the questions, and eventually it starts to crystallize in my head.
Mm,
Like, that's what my unconscious was doing the whole time. So they're very, very different tracks. And in terms of what I'm working on at the time, at any given moment, I don't talk too much about that really. I may give someone a kind of overview if they ask. Sometimes, rarely, if depending on the timing, I may read an excerpt or try to send an excerpt out for publication. But there isn't real. It doesn't create any kind of dissonance or discord in my head, if that's what you're wondering.
mm, yeah, yeah. And I mean, on specifically promoting the book, I mean, how have things changed in terms of how you're going about
God,
promoting this, and then how you promoted the Contortionist Handbook and Dermaphoria? Not
yeah.
just in terms of the specific books, but in terms of the shift in the industry. I mean, do you feel, is there more onus on the writer to promote than there was before? Perhaps the publisher that you're with also plays into it. So what are you doing in terms of that?
It's really, I mean, God, the industry has changed so much since Dermaphoria was my last one. I mean, with a few short things here and there, but social media has blossomed to a ridiculous degree, as well as electronic media with publishers and print on demand, and
Mm,
self-publishing has almost achieved a level of legitimacy in certain places. Um, yeah, a lot has changed. But with me, my first publisher was a small independent house. I didn't have an agent at the time. That was my mistake. Um, I have an agent this time who is really good, in terms of like talking me off the ledge if I'm concerned about something. I think now, I don't know if more or less onus is on the writer. My publisher is also a small press. They're muscular, but they're small, and they're also in the UK. So while I've got American distribution, there's little real time interaction between us. There's not we can't just jump on the phone to each other. So a lot of it's on me, I think. I mean, they're doing a lot. They're awesome, but I've just kind of got to try to stoke the coals of social media here as much as I can. I'm not super comfortable with it, but I try. I
mm,
try to get news out there when I can, and I'm just wondering, what's the code? How do I crack this? How does something go viral? How are these people doing it? I don't know what the secret is, so I'm just trying to flog it like an obnoxious midway carnival barker as much as I can. It's not natural. A little bit of distaste in my mouth, at times, but I'm just trying to, stoke the coals and get some interest. I contacted a local independent bookstore to take pre-orders for signed copies. They're small. They didn't know who I was, and I had to let them. They had a big thing on their site about if you want us to stock your book, because they get a lot of people with self-published stuff coming to them, I'm sure. So I approached them. I had to give them the link to Random House, let them know I was legit. And when I got physical copies, I went down there and introduced myself. And they were lovely people. It was nice to talk to them. Gave them a copy. And they were. I wanted to make certain that we were communicating, that they weren't getting pre-orders, that they bounced right back out as soon as they came in, that I was going to come there and deface them with my signature. That was my concern. But going down there, they were lovely people. It was good to talk to them and everything, but I had this weird kind of door-to-door salesman feeling in my head when I went there. It felt very unnatural, and I was not very comfortable. Like, hey, nice space you've got here. When you move to the new one, it just felt, I was sincere, but it didn't feel sincere to me, if that makes any sense.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And I wonder too, I mean, how has the pandemic shifted in terms of the dynamic doing these kind of in-person events and these in-person meetings in America? Is it getting close to going back to a pre-pandemic level of things? Has the pandemic shifted things to a point where it will never return to how it was?
Well, for my hats off to anybody that released a book during the pandemic. I went to a couple of online book releases, author events where you can't get a signature, but at least you're there getting a Q&A. God, it's hard to say, because as much as social media has flourished since the last time I was touring for a book, the pandemic pushed it up even further. I mean, you guys, you went from audio to video,
Mm,
over the course of the pandemic, and I can barely keep up with social media as it is. Elon Musk is pretty much set fire to Twitter, and that's the largest audience I've got. Although I don't know how much I do on there reaches all of those people, it's still the largest audience. I was able to cultivate that, and now it's going to go up
mm,
in flames. I don't know how people can, TikTok, boom, people jump on TikTok. For a while, I was chasing down every time there was a new thing, I would grab it so I would have Craig Clevenger on that thing, and I can't do it anymore. I've got a Substack account that I haven't done anything with because I just barely had the wherewithal to update my WordPress website. I just don't know how people do it all. It's exhausting. Um, but it's necessary. As far as the pandemic, I'm okay doing in-person things. I don't mind that. I'm not keen about getting on an airplane full of people right now.
mm.
I'm just not, uh, for a host of reasons. But I'm doing an event this Sunday, a live event at the library. So how it's changed, I don't know. I was pretty much hunkered down, and I went to a few book events, virtual book events during the pandemic. But I think I'll think of all sorts of answers as soon as we're done here. But I think it's largely the fact that social media keeps branching out, and a new node comes up that everyone has to jump on, and trying to cultivate an audience is just, it's a job in itself.
Yeah, yeah. And I understand too why you don't have time to keep getting the Craig Clevenger username on all the social media networks because, I mean, at the moment, a lot of people are anticipating, Twitter will disappear at some point in the perhaps
Yeah,
not too distant future. But as a result of that, there are so many platforms that are turning up as a potential alternative. But the reality is, whatever platform does kind of replace Twitter, as it were, we don't know what that will be. So it's exhausting to get like, Hive, Mastodon, uh,
yeah,
Blue Sky Social, which is an interesting one because that's
yeah,
actually Jack Dorsey's who founded Twitter. So I think of those three, that's the one that perhaps has the most legs to stand on. But I've said before, I think whatever so called replaces Twitter, it won't really be a Twitter clone. It will be something different that we didn't anticipate. And I just feel like let's just wait until it happens, rather than worrying about an event that has yet to happen. Now we can do things like have a mailing list and different ways to reach out to our audience, our readers. But right now, Twitter does still exist. Yeah, there have been some not for the better changes, but I mean, only this past week or so, they've got a new CEO. So I wonder what changes that will bring. And
Yeah,
yeah, we don't know until we see how that plays out.
and I would be perfectly happy just unplugged from all of them, barring
Mm,
keeping in touch with a few close friends and
yeah,
family. But like I said, I've been keeping the coals warm all this time anticipating a new book and trying to build an audience. I mean, I've been on Instagram for a few months now, and I'm not even close to where I was on Twitter. You
yeah,
know, it takes a long time. So yeah, it's just maddeningly frustrating, and that's the major reason. And a lot of people approach me about self-publishing. Um, I don't have any problem with it, but the thing is, I mean, unless you are able to, unless you've got the wherewithal to not just write, but actually design. I mean, do a
mm,
good design job. This, you can tell when something was done by a designer versus, someone that just got a bootleg copy of Photoshop. And there's layout, typesetting, to say nothing of marketing, distribution, even just ebooks, because if you're not doing any of that, you're just a printer, maybe. you know
yeah,
it's a full-time job, and I don't want to be a publisher. I want to write. So uh, I have to cultivate my social media networks for this reason, but it's a drain. it, it it
yeah,
it really is sometimes. I mean, it's a lot of my messages, direct messages, go unread because I just don't have the like, there's we all have 11 different ways to get in touch with us now,
mm,
and that's just 11 too many as far as I'm concerned.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I mean,
No,
Chris
that.
Bear and I, when he lived here, he and I would meet once a week, and it was pretty much smoke signals. We pretty much just we knew we'd meet at the bar. My buddy up in the Bay Area works at City of Lights. I was up there once a month. It was a single text message. Walk and talk, same time and place. And we had our rendezvous place, and we just
Mm,
grab coffee and shoot the shit for a couple hours and walk the city once a month. It was my best therapy.
yeah,
Um, that's how everyone used to do things, and now it's just too much. Peak pandemic, when I would stand in line at grocery stores, I would have a book with me, and I lost count of the amount of times people would say, "You brought something to read? That's a great idea." And I'm thinking, no, it's not. That's how we used to do things. People used to have books with them. You'd go to the bank. Oh shit, there's a line. Grab something to read. Um, so I don't know how to answer that. It's exhausting. I'm hoping the book gets enough traction that some of the work will be done for me, because right now it's all feels kind of uphill.
yeah, yeah. And I don't think it's fair for us to kind of compare Instagram or TikTok to Twitter because, I mean, they're completely different mediums. Like, I don't think I'm going to get the audience on Instagram that I have with Twitter because this is images rather than text.
Yeah,
Also, it's so much more time consuming to put an image and then with TikTok, a video
yeah,
together, and then that's particularly with TikTok, even before you consider balancing it with authenticity. The people
yeah,
doing TikTok videos and having success and the kind of stuff that I do, there's not much crossover. Like it would be like just creating this wacky personality that it would feel
yeah.
so phony and bullshit, and people would laugh at it because they'd be like, "What the fuck are you doing? That's not you." And
And I
I
just
don't
hate
know.
being photographed
Yeah,
anyway. So yeah, anything that involves pointing a camera at my own face, I'm just not going to do. So
right. I mean, this is pretty much the only the only way that like I can even have something that I can put out because with me on video and it feel authentic.
Yeah.
It's because you're getting it in the context. But I can't create some 1 minute kind of flashback. What the fuck am I gonna say in 1 minute anyway that's of any real value? You know.
Yeah, I try to keep it to quotes from the book and blurbs and the
Mm,
occasional bit of news. And I'm cycling through all the blurbs now as we approach release date. But yeah, I'm keeping it simple. I don't know what the magic trick is. What's the equivalent of, like my old publisher said, Hendrix lighting the guitar on fire. What's the equivalent of that? I don't know.
No one knows. I mean,
Yeah,
that's the thing. You can sit there and you can write out the most eloquent tweet in the world and get one like,
yeah.
and you can get on there and you go, "Man, I clipped my toenails too short," and
Poop
fuck, you're
emoji.
viral. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're fucking
yeah.
on the news, you know. And I was like, well, yeah, they bled a little bit, but that's normal.
my
Yeah.
publisher, like when I first met the PR, the marketing folks from my publisher, they asked me about. I said I don't like being photographed, but I'll suck it up if it's going to help. But as far as an audience speaking in front of people, I'm fine. They seemed very relieved by that. Um, I don't know if that maybe it's not usual, but I'm quite comfortable in front of an audience
Mm,
if there's a structure to it. A live group. I know public speaking is considered a lot of people's darkest fear, and I'm
mm,
good with it. So they were very relieved by that. Again, I don't know if that's going to be anything useful post or quasi post pandemic or not. My buddy at City Lights already said, you want to do a live event, it'll be in September, but nothing during the summer. We're still doing virtual. So
mm.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just hoping the book has a life of its own. That's all I can hope for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting trying to, look at the value of live events anyway. I mean, I know that Jason Pargin, who wrote John Dies at the End, he doesn't do in-person events because if you're looking at it purely from a marketing standpoint rather than like a personal connection, just
Right.
like the numbers don't really add up. Whereas if you're doing a virtual event, I mean, even like a relatively unsuccessful podcast would probably get more people listening than you would at like a relatively packed bookstore event. And that's before we've even factored in all the money that it would take you to get to the event, the time, the meals, the alcohol. I guess, like, the alcohol is a bonus, so we don't maybe need to include that as a detriment. But in terms of like just looking at it as more an equation in terms of audience, I don't know if the in-store event really works out, but I
See,
do concede that the personal connection that you're going to get meeting that reader, having the conversation, that is going to stick with them far more than they listen to the podcast.
yeah, and I think you're right in some respects. I think in terms of like in-store appearances, as far as moving books, I think
Mm,
a lot of writers feel it's just not really it's the numbers don't really add up. But
mm,
see, I think there's a lot of value in that personal connection. So I may get
mm,
100 people, say, for a virtual event and 10
mm,
for an in-person one, but maybe one of those 100 people from a virtual event might send out a tweet or something and said, "Hey, I had a good time at the thing." But people at virtual events are going to make
mm.
more noise. They're the
Yeah,
ones who are going to go out and they're going to do selfies with the book they got or take pictures with the author, and that's going to circulate more, and it's going to mean more to them to meet the author. And frankly, it's nice meeting readers. I like that.
yeah,
Whenever I sign books, I always have one of mine that I ask people to sign. If I'm going to sign yours, you got to sign mine. And I love meeting that. And those people are going to have, or they're going to propagate, you know, your work because of that, I think, to a greater degree. Maybe I'm being naive. I don't know. But it's disappointing, if you're looking forward to reading and you've got three people there. I've had that happen. We all have. But it's just I think it means more to the readers, and those readers propagate, the work more because of that.
Yeah.
And again, I don't like being photographed, so just zooming with like 100-person tile Brady Bunch screen in front of me just does not sound appealing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right too that that those people going to the in-person event, they're far more likely to talk about it. So in a sense, you are getting a combination of both there because they're probably going to have a Twitter, so they're probably now circulating it on that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's no. Unfortunately, there is no formula. There is no exact answer
Mm-mm.
here, and so doing a combination of the two and seeing what ultimately works for you is going to be the best way to go about it and experiment. I mean, yeah, it's a little harder for me here in Japan than it was when I was living in the UK because it costs quite a lot of money to get to the main audience. But
Yeah.
there's a little scene of writers, writing in the English language here in Japan. Like one of the people who lives really near to me is Stephen Golds, who edited an anthology. I think you had a story in it. I know that he's certainly he's done stuff with Outcast Press. I'm trying to
It
recall if it
sounds
was the
yeah,
one,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
but
think yeah,
but
I
yeah,
do
I
know the name from Outcast, yeah.
mm, yeah. I feel that and as with a lot of things, it's like if there isn't quite the community, then create it. That's kind of the thing that I am very conscious of, and I will be talking to different people about it. As I mentioned earlier, though, maybe get this divorce and custody out of the way first before I before I
Yeah.
decide to create a writing and reading community in Japan. Just let me deal with that, and then we'll we'll get to the networking.
Yeah, Gabino Iglesias is. I mean, I also pull back a lot from the like the networking is the word you use, is because again, it takes a lot of effort, and I think there's a lot of writers out there that I think would be better off just focusing on their craft more than the networking. Unless you're going to invert it, I think if you're using your stature and your network to boost other writers,
Yeah,
that's I mean, Gabino Iglesias, God bless him, man. He is always he's a life coach as much as he's a writer, and I mean that
yeah,
in a good way, dude. If you're listening, don't come at me. But like he's always like doing follow Friday Twitter boosts for
yeah.
other readers that hey, what do you got coming out? Putting out little motivational things. He is always like using his level of exposure to not just build his network or try to find that magic influencer that's going to spread the word about him, but he's just
Mm,
using it to bring other people up. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's I think paradoxically is going to be it's probably the better way to go, I think.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think so. I mean, it can become just a little bit much if somebody only ever seems to be looking out for themselves. So it it again though is a difficult one to get the balance right because
Mm-hmm.
also it also becomes obvious if you're only promoting other people because you really want to serve yourself. So you have to be authentic in the way that you're doing it. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that as with anything, you could do whatever with the best of intentions, and there will be somebody who will criticize it,
Always.
who will say that's not why you're doing it. So I think, you know, my rule generally is to be authentic. If you're being authentic and you're being sincere, that's a good starting point.
I agree. I just, like I said, I start with the writing and everything else comes second. So,
Yeah,
maybe when one day when I've got, Gabino's following, I will happily, signal boost everybody else.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's like we said before. I mean, it can become another job,
Yeah.
and like you said that you you have no real desire to go into self-publishing and independently publishing because then you're having about 5 or 6 jobs at once. I mean, there's a very good reason why I shied away from publishing via This Is Horror, because you know I needed to. Something had to give out of the writing, the podcasting, my day job, and
Yeah.
publishing. And well, whilst there have been times where I haven't had a day job, from a practical point of view, that is necessary. So, okay, that can't be the one to go. And so the writing and podcasting, I didn't want to go either. So it was like, well, I guess it's the publishing where I'm not just a
Yeah.
publisher, I'm the editor, the marketer, I'm the accountant. It's ridiculous.
And I say all this knowing as soon as we're done, I'm going to check my feed, see if there's anything I got to respond to. Do I have anything to post? If I heard back from so and so, do I have any reviews yet? It's still, as much as I, bitch about it, I'm going to go feed the beast.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. And I mean, yeah, we spoke at the start that you're, working on the fourth novel with the deal for Mother Howl. I mean, have you been looking at kind of where you can sell the fourth one? Is that a conversation you've had with publishers and agents? Is that something that's coming later? As I'm asking this, is this something that you just can't talk about?
Well,
This
it's,
is
it's
not.
I can talk if there's anything to talk about. I will. It's really up
Yeah,
to I'll defer to my agent. He's done right by me so far. I think he's just waiting for me to get the fucking manuscript to him. We can have this
yeah,
discussion once he's got the manuscript. Um, I'm hoping. I mean, if nothing else, I mean, Mother Howl makes enough noise that I can get the handbook and Dermaphoria back into print.
mm,
That's what I would really like. But beyond that, um, I haven't thought that far ahead. Right, as far as writing the other book, that's all I'm thinking out in terms of writing. In terms of a publishing deal, all I'm thinking about now is Mother Howl. It's the release date is still not here yet. It's a few weeks out. And there's work to be done. So I'll think about the next book, flogging the next book when I type the end and send it off to my agent.
yeah, yeah. Do you think the release of Mother Howl, is that one of the factors that kind of rekindled your enthusiasm for writing after, you said that it did dip?
It was, what did it. I spent the pandemic. I started, when I was working at the library, a community program. I started, because it's kind of, we all have to do that as part of the job. I started a writer's workshop, but then we met for a few months before the pandemic hit, so I went virtual. And I figured I'd take the opportunity to start bringing in other writers that I knew and I could interview and bring some heavyweight people in
Mm,
to you know help out the library. Stephen Jones, Brian Evanson,
yeah,
Lydia Yuknovich, some good names, and it was a lot of fun. Um, it was the interview I had with Rob Hart, who I've known for a very long time, but that's really what did it. I think I emailed him this, and I think he was a bit taken aback, but yeah, I just wasn't enjoying the process anymore. And Rob, I have known for a very long time. We're not super tight. He lives on the East Coast, but he was somebody who wrote me a letter after the handbook came out, and I wrote him back, and And now here he is, pretty much writing. I mean, he just shot right into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
And I remember telling him, we were talking about, the whole conversation is around big ideas and big themes and concepts and how he wrestles with them. And I told him I thought this was strange because I remember a short story he wrote, that had a very big concept in it that I didn't think was possible. I thought he would torpedo his career before it started. Um, and I was wrong. He pulled it off. It was a powerful, nuanced, beautiful piece. And I told him this, and he says, "But you forgot to mention I wrote that for a class of yours." And I said, "Well, we're not talking about me. This is you, dude. I didn't want to. I
Mm.
didn't want to keep the focus on him, but it was talking to him and his process, and from that first time he, emailed me, decades ago to where he is now, and then me kind of seeing that starting point and him saying, "Well, that was you." I mean, I think it was just seeing that kind of direct instance of not being published and getting paid and recognized, but having someone say, "No, this influenced me. This was helpful. This helped me along the way." And that just made me feel like, okay, maybe I should pull my hat out. It's not about reviews and this and that, but it kind of is. But still, I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but it was that conversation with Rob Hart that really just kind of lit the fire back, I think, and in a lot of ways. And that's not to disregard. I mean, I've known Rob Rivera for years. Good God, that guy has saved my life in more ways than one, more ways than I can count.
Mm.
But it was that conversation in particular that had me kind of like pull my head out a little bit, or
Mm.
all the way, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, and in terms of the virtual events and the interview series that you had, is that something that you're looking to continue now that we're kind of out of the pandemic? I'm reluctant to, you know what I mean, though, now that things
Yeah.
have changed somewhat.
Well, I'd like to, because it's an easy way now that video, this kind of thing, has become more the norm. It's a great way to
Mm.
get people who otherwise wouldn't be coming through this part of town on their book tours. When I started this, I was up in like way north of here in like the beginning of the Central Coast Farm Belt. I mean, it was a rural library. We were like down the road from it was in a double wide, not a double wide. It was actually a decommissioned military barrack. That was the library. That's where I ran the workshop, and it was like pretty much farmland all around us. So the pandemic, doing it virtually, nobody's coming there on their book tour. So I would like to do more in the future. Absolutely. I think at this point I have done most every, with a few notable exceptions. I've done pretty much everybody I can reach out to that I have some prior connection with.
Mm.
All Stephen Jones, the whole lot were people that with the exception of Helen Phillips, God bless her. These are all people I knew, and so and unless Mother Howl does something where people will return my calls at this point. Um, if that happens, then I would absolutely like to start it back up again. But in the meantime, I am doing it monthly in person there. So
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
interviews are available on the Goleta Valley Library's YouTube channel, though. So not
Yeah.
all of them. There's only a handful of them I was able to record, but there's a cluster of good interviews on there.
Yeah. Yeah, we linked to them the previous time, but as I don't expect our listeners to have to go back 100 or so episodes, I will link to them a second time. But, you know, people listening, if you've enjoyed this, then do listen to the other two episodes, episodes 401 and 402. So, yeah, pretty much 100 episodes ago from the time of
Wow.
recording. I guess this will probably be about 507 or something, but this is
You are
redundant
recording.
information. If people are listening, you can see the number is the fucking number when you look down at your phone or listening device.
And I'm hoping your recording's working, because I'm not seeing any little like sine wave coming through my name here. You
It,
guys,
it
so I hope you're getting it, because it doesn't seem to be coming on mine.
I
You can hear
I
me.
am, and I'm getting the sound wave on your
Okay,
end too.
good.
Yes.
So
Good, good.
just to confirm, you know, glad that you pointed that technical issue out nearly 2 hours in. That is definitely the time to do it.
No,
Yeah, should have
we're
mentioned that
getting it.
earlier, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it all looks good. Well, we are, coming to the end of the time that we have together for this conversation. Bob, was there anything Mother Hell related that we haven't covered that you're dying to jump into?
I mean, we covered it pretty well. The one thing that I will say is that we've heard, people of the Velvet, we've heard about this novel for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and to actually, I got the Kindle copy to read. I received my paperback copy in the mail today.
Yeah, that's been happening. They're coming out a little early. That's fine. That's
Yeah,
cool.
and it was just like, I'm sure the feeling for you was probably 100 billion times more intense than this. But just to hold this damn thing, it's like, damn, we did it. He did it. He did it. We got it. And man, it was outstanding.
Well, thanks. Thanks.
Fucking
I mean,
loved it.
thanks. It was, it's been a long time coming, and it's like I said, for me, it's more of a feeling of relief. As far as my agent and my publisher editor go, major fist bumps to them. I'm big time, but for me personally, I just kind of went, okay, wow, yeah, all right, cool. Next, kind of, it's just a weight off my shoulders. I'll feel a lot better when I start, when the trades weigh in, review wise and such. I've had a couple of, UK book bloggers say some kind things, but, I'm just waiting on like the rest to come. But I shouldn't stress over that too much, but it is nice to, like I said, I feel like I've been in like a Russian cosmonaut that I've been lost in orbit for years. Now I'm back. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm
That's
just
probably a good
honest,
way to describe it.
and honestly, I'm most moved by the fact that I have any traction at all, that there are still people out there that have been waiting for this book, that still know who I am, that still give a shit. That really touched me. I'm happy to hear that. So yeah.
Yeah, but I do feel, for years that, when we're talking about like favorite writers, it's so often that your name and Stephen Graham Jones will come up again and again. So like I I guess, yeah. I mean, from a technical standpoint, you're right. There hasn't been a release for quite some time, but I feel that, like, you never disappeared from the conversation. And, like, I mean, to me, the handbook in particular, I mean, it is a classic. It is one that will be mentioned again and again. And I hope, yeah, I hope for years beyond any of us existing.
Yeah, I think it's impossible not to think in terms of just raw financial gain. No matter how realistic you are,
Yeah.
humble you are, I think every writer in the back of your mind, there's this tiny kernel of hope that it'll be a bestseller. And
Mm,
99.9% of the time, it's not going to happen. But you, you rarely think about. I didn't think about all the other markers for success.
mm,
In spite of how I would do so much different with that book. Now, the fact is, like, it still has legs. I still get notes about it now, 20 years later. Um, I've seen tattoos, with it,
yeah.
tat people. dermaphoria tattoos I've seen. You don't think about people like having that kind of an attachment for a book that long, generations. I mean, there's a literal generation now that is reading it in as much as they can get their hands on it, that wasn't reading when it came out.
Yeah.
So yeah, it never topped the charts, but it just refuses to die. And I had no idea how I did that. It's a fucking accident, man. But I'm happy and I'm touched. So
Yeah.
hey, Meep,
Yeah.
the Pixel's here to join the conversation. So
But I
that's the
mean,
cat. I'm sorry, that's my cat's name. So
yeah, yeah, I assumed probably that was the cat, yeah. But I mean, like you said before as well, let's really hope that, both the handbook and Dermaphoria at the very least are back in print as a result of, what's going on now. Um, I mean, in terms of the rights, are they easily available? Is that a complex situation?
well, they're still in print in a whole bunch of places overseas. I like upwards of, I think we're close to 30 languages at this point. Dermaphoria gets all the really rogue places. Like I just got the Arabic version of Dermaphoria and the hard copies of that recently, and I think the last right sale was from Macedonia. No matter how many times I say that, no matter how many times I look on the map, I still don't know where the fuck Macedonia is. But yeah, so they're still out there. But the print ebook, I mean, it's still in print in the UK.
Mm.
I still get small royalty checks from HarperCollins. Hopefully, it'll get a boost soon. The ebook rights are, unfortunately, I don't know if I'll be able to get those. I hope so. That's a long story having to do with my inept former publisher. But as far as the North American print rights for both of them, they're mine. And anybody out there, call my agent if you're interested in putting them back in print. So hopefully that'll happen with Mother Howl launching
Mm.
here,
All
and
right. Well,
maybe it does
oh,
not take too goddamn long to get this fourth one done. But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I hope so, but I do recall last time, and you might not appreciate me reminding you of this, but you did say at that point that for the last year and a half it had been about 3 months away from completion.
yep,
So,
that is the story of my life right
yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah. Uh, well, where can our listeners connect with you? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of places where you've got the Craig Clevenger username, but whether you're actually active
Yeah,
there or not.
I'm pretty easy to find. I mean, my website's craigclevenger.com. I try to keep that up to date, but again, sitting down and doing that is a whole other headache. But it's there. Craig Clevenger on Twitter and Facebook. Instagram is Craig Clevenger 621. I actually have Craig Clevenger, but I lost the login. God knows how I can get. So I just had to create a new account, and 621 is a number that turns up and stuff a lot with me. It's a Barton Fink's hotel room number. So yeah,
Mm.
those three places are the main places. You can find me. I'm easy to track down. Yeah,
All right. Do you have any final thoughts to leave our listeners with?
I'm sure I will think of something really witty and memorable as soon as we hang up. All I can say is that Mother Howl is out on June 13th. If you pre-ordered it, um, thank you, thanks. I mean, I'm just grateful that, like I said, there's traction out there and that people like it. And if more than royalties, word of mouth is valuable. So like to support the Amazon Goodreads, just telling people about it is support that I appreciate. And contact my publisher, editor, agent, whatever, if you want me in your town to do a bookstore thing or something. I'd be happy to be there.